Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. Your endless internet wandering has brought you here, and hopefully you can finally sleep to today's topic. Now before we begin, comment where you are listening from and how late it is where you are at. It is very interesting to see how far and wide people come. Also, please subscribe, it would be very appreciated. Let us begin. Greek mythology begins not with gods in golden halls or mighty heroes wielding swords, but in a chasm of darkness and silence, the primordial void called chaos. Before there was earth or sky or sea, there was chaos, an infinite, shapeless mass that contained all elements but with no order or distinction. From this void emerged the first primordial deities, beings that represented concepts more than physical forms. Gaia, the earth, rose from chaos, solid and eternal, the fertile mother of all life. Alongside her came Tartarus, the dark abyss beneath the underworld, Eros, the force of desire and procreation, Erebus, the deep darkness, and Nyx, the night. These entities were not born in the human sense but simply came into being. Gaia, acting alone, gave birth to Uranus, the sky, to blanket her and become her equal. Their union was the first cosmic order, earth below, sky above. Together, Gaia and Uranus produced the Titans, powerful and towering beings who embodied various forces of nature and time. Among them were Oceanus, the endless river encircling the world, Hyperion, the light, Coeus, the intellect, Crius, the constellations, Iapetus, mortality, Thea, the shining, Rhea, fertility and motherhood, the Mys, divine law, Mnemosyne, memory, Phoebe, prophecy, Tessis, freshwater, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning. But Uranus was not a benevolent father. Horrified by his children, especially the monstrous offspring Gaia bore, the Hecatoncheirs, beings with 100 hands, and the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants, Uranus cast them into Tartarus, the pit of torment. Gaia, in pain from her children's imprisonment and fury at Uranus' cruelty, devised a plan. She fashioned a great sickle of adamant and called upon her children to rise against their tyrannical father. Only Cronus, ambitious and bold, accepted. When Uranus came to lie with Gaia, Cronus ambushed him, wielding the sickle and castrating him, casting the severed parts into the sea. From the blood that fell onto the earth came the Erinyes, avenging spirits, the giants, and the Melee, nymphs of the ash trees. From the foam in the sea where his genitals fell, Aphrodite was born, the goddess of love and beauty. With Uranus dethroned, Cronus and his siblings ruled in a new age, the Golden Age. Cronus took Rhea, his sister, as his queen, and together they had children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. But Cronus, haunted by a prophecy that he would be overthrown by one of his children, swallowed each of them whole at birth. Rhea, desperate to save her youngest, Zeus, hid him on the island of Crete and gave Cronus a swaddled stone to swallow instead. Zeus was raised in secret by nymphs and divine goats, nurtured in caves far from Cronus's reach. When he came of age, Zeus returned to confront his father. With the help of Metis, a titan of wisdom, he tricked Cronus into vomiting up his siblings. Together, the 6 children of Cronus waged war against the Titans, a cataclysmic conflict known as the Titanomachy. For 10 years the Olympians and the Titans battled, shaking the earth and sky. Gaia advised Zeus to free the Hecatoncheirs and the Cyclopes from Tartarus, and in return, the Cyclopes forged thunderbolts for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, and a helmet of invisibility for Hades. With these gifts and the might of their monstrous allies, the Olympians turned the tide. Zeus hurled thunderbolts, Poseidon shattered the ground, Hades struck from shadows. Cronus and his Titan allies were defeated and cast into Tartarus, guarded by the Hecatoncheirs. But not all Titans were punished. Some, like Prometheus and Oceanus, had sided with Zeus. With the Titans vanquished, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide the world. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. Thus began the reign of the Olympians on Mount Olympus, a new divine order atop the world. Yet the scars of war and betrayal did not fade. Even in victory, the gods carried the legacy of their brutal origins. The story of Greek mythology is not one of peace, but of power seized and re-seized, of cycles of birth, rebellion, and vengeance. The Olympians were gods, yes, but not perfect beings. They quarreled, deceived, loved, and raged with the intensity of the mortals they ruled. And their stories, layered with symbolism, divine pettiness, cosmic justice, and human frailty, would define a civilization and echo across centuries. The world of Greek mythology was now set, a universe governed by gods who were as flawed and passionate as the humans who worshipped them. Mount Olympus, crowned in clouds, would become the center of this divine drama, but its roots lay deep in chaos, betrayal, and blood. The reign of the Olympians began not as a period of peace but as an uneasy establishment of power, marked by new challenges that tested the very fabric of their rule. With the Titans defeated and banished to Tartarus, Zeus faced immediate threats to his newly claimed throne. The first came not from an ancient enemy, but from Gaia herself. Outraged by the imprisonment of her children, the Titans, Gaia gave birth to Typhon, a monstrous force of nature meant to challenge the sovereignty of the gods. Typhon was unlike any creature that had come before, towering beyond mountains, with serpents for legs and wings that darkened the skies. His eyes burned with fire, his voice roared across continents, and when he moved, the earth trembled. The Olympians, faced with such overwhelming power, fled in terror. Most disguised themselves as animals and scattered across the earth, but Zeus stood his ground. A colossal battle erupted between the sky god and the chaos-born giant, with mountains shattered and oceans boiled. Zeus hurled thunderbolt after thunderbolt, but Typhon answered with hurricane winds and molten fire. Eventually, Zeus managed to strike Typhon down and trap him beneath Mount Etna, where the creature's writhing fury was said to cause the mountain's volcanic eruptions. With this victory, Zeus solidified his dominance, but the struggle revealed a harsh truth: the rule of Olympus would be constantly tested. Even gods could bleed, and power, once seized, must be defended endlessly. As Zeus secured his rule, he began to shape the cosmos into a more stable order. He took Hera as his queen, not only to reinforce his sovereignty but also to create a divine counterpart who could temper his often impulsive nature. Hera, the goddess of marriage and childbirth, was regal and fiercely proud, yet her union with Zeus was fraught with betrayal. For all his authority, Zeus was endlessly unfaithful, seducing goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women alike. Each of these affairs birthed new beings, some divine, others demigod, but all added new threads to the ever-expanding web of myth. From Leto, he fathered Apollo and Artemis, twin deities of the sun and moon. From Semele, a mortal woman, he sired Dionysus, god of wine and madness. From Maia, a quiet nymph, came Hermes, the cunning messenger. Hera's jealousy often exploded in wrath, not just against Zeus but against his lovers and their offspring. Her rage was relentless and cunning, and it shaped many myths to come. One of the most tragic consequences of this divine infidelity was the fate of Heracles, son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene. From the moment of his birth, Hera despised him. She sent serpents into his cradle, which the infant hero strangled with his bare hands. Later, she drove him to madness, causing him to kill his own wife and children. To atone, Heracles was forced to undertake 12 impossible labors, a journey of suffering, strength, and redemption. These divine dramas were more than family squabbles. They were allegories for human struggle, ambition, and the cost of greatness. As the gods established their dominion, they began to organize the world beneath them. Poseidon ruled the seas with a temper as wild as the storms he controlled. He created horses and earthquakes, and his wrath could sink entire fleets. Hades, grim and solemn, ruled the underworld, a place not of torture but of shadow and judgment. Mortals who died were escorted by Hermes to the river Styx, ferried across by Charon, and judged by 3 former kings, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. The underworld had realms for heroes, villains, and ordinary souls alike. Elysium was a paradise, Tartarus a prison, and the Asphodel Meadows a grey reflection of life's mundanity. Even among the gods, the boundaries between life and death were sacred. The myth of Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, brought this to light. Hades abducted Persephone to make her his queen. Demeter, grief-stricken, allowed the earth to wither. Crops failed, famine spread, and humanity suffered. Eventually, Zeus intervened. A deal was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades and the rest with her mother. Thus, the seasons were born, her return marking spring and her descent heralding autumn and winter. These myths reflected the rhythms of nature and the mysteries of existence, giving people meaning in a world often ruled by chaos and uncertainty. Meanwhile, on Mount Olympus, each god and goddess carved out their domain. Athena, born fully grown and armored from Zeus's forehead, became the goddess of wisdom and war strategy. She was a virgin goddess, aloof and powerful, a patroness of heroes and cities, especially Athens, which bore her name. Ares, god of war, was her counterpart, violent, impulsive, and bloodthirsty. He represented the brutality of battle, while Athena represented its discipline and intellect. Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire, wielded power over gods and mortals alike. Born from sea foam, she was married to Hephaestus, the crippled god of fire and craftsmanship, yet she loved Ares and countless others. Her influence sparked both divine rivalries and human tragedies. Artemis, virgin huntress and protector of wildlife, roamed forests with her bow and nymphs. Apollo, her twin, was a god of music, prophecy, and the sun, presiding over the oracle at Delphi, where mortals sought divine truth. Hermes, swift and sly, guided souls to the underworld and acted as Zeus's messenger. He was a trickster, a thief, and a protector of travelers. Demeter tended the earth's fertility, while Dionysus, born from fire and madness, embodied ecstasy, wine, and transformation. Each god and goddess was both divine and deeply human, reflecting the virtues and vices of the mortals who told their stories. The Olympians ruled not with absolute control, but through influence, persuasion, punishment, and reward. Their interactions with mortals created an endless cycle of myths, where destiny, hubris, and divine intervention shaped the fate of individuals and empires. The lines between God and man, fate and choice, were forever blurred. In this cosmic tapestry, the gods were not distant creators, but intimate forces, dancing in storms, whispering in dreams, punishing arrogance, and rewarding loyalty. And their stories were just beginning. Though the Olympians now ruled the cosmos from their throne atop Mount Olympus, their grip on the world was anything but absolute. Their influence touched every corner of mortal and divine existence, yet their authority was constantly tested. By each other, by mortals, and by forces even older than themselves. Their own personalities, marked by human flaws and divine arrogance, often led to chaos. The ancient Greeks did not see their gods as paragons of virtue but as powerful, volatile entities whose whims could either bless or destroy. This unpredictability was no more evident than in their constant entanglement with humanity. From the very beginning, the relationship between gods and mortals was defined by tension, fascination, and transgression. Prometheus, one of the few titans who had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, emerged as a champion of humankind. When Zeus refused to give fire to mortals, fearing that it would make them too powerful, Prometheus defied him and stole the flame from Olympus, gifting it to humanity. Fire was not just warmth or light, it was technology, knowledge, and power. This act of defiance enraged Zeus, who devised a punishment both cruel and eternal. Prometheus was bound to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where every day an eagle would feast upon his liver, only for it to regenerate overnight. His torment was endless, a warning to gods and mortals alike about the cost of challenging divine authority. But Zeus's vengeance did not stop there. As a counterbalance to Prometheus's gift, he ordered the creation of the first woman, Pandora. Crafted by Hephaestus, endowed with beauty by Aphrodite, wisdom by Athena, and charm by Hermes, Pandora was given a jar, later misinterpreted as a box, and sent alive among humans. She was instructed never to open it, but curiosity, another divine gift, overcame her. When she lifted the lid, suffering, disease, death, and all manner of evils were released into the world. Only hope remained, trapped at the bottom. Through this myth, the Greeks explained not only the origin of pain but also the paradox of human existence, that suffering and hope are inseparably bound. The gods continued to meddle in mortal affairs, often driven by jealousy, love, pride, or spite. These interactions frequently blurred the lines between the divine and human worlds, producing demigods, offspring of gods and mortals, who carried immense power but were fated to suffer. Among these was Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae. Conceived through a golden shower that Zeus used to reach Danae in her prison, Perseus grew to become a monster slayer and hero. With gifts from the gods, Hermes' winged sandals, Hades' helm of invisibility, and Athena's polished shield, he beheaded Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, symbolizing the miraculous born from the grotesque. Perseus's exploits were numerous, from saving Andromeda from a sea monster to founding cities, but his life was always shaped by divine interference. Another famed demigod was Theseus, son of either Poseidon or the mortal king Aegeus, depending on the myth. Theseus became the slayer of the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature imprisoned in the labyrinth of Crete. The labyrinth itself was a marvel of ancient imagination, an inescapable maze designed by Daedalus, the legendary craftsman. With the help of Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, Theseus entered the maze, killed the Minotaur, and escaped by following a thread she had given him. Yet his triumph was tinged with tragedy. On his return voyage, Theseus forgot to change his sails from black to white, a signal to his father that he had survived. Seeing the black sails, Aegeus threw himself into the sea in despair, which thereafter bore his name, the Aegean Sea. Theseus's story, like many Greek myths, wove victory and loss into a single thread, reflecting the unpredictable balance of fate. But no hero loomed larger in Greek mythology than Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. Born of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, Heracles was cursed from birth by Hero's hatred. His strength was legendary, his feats unmatched, yet his life was a series of sufferings inflicted by divine cruelty. After being driven mad by Hera and murdering his family, Heracles was ordered to complete 12 labors to atone. These included slaying the Nemean lion, whose skin was impervious to weapons, capturing the golden-horned Cyrenian hind, cleaning the Augean stables in a single day, and capturing Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of the underworld. Each labor tested not only his strength but his resilience and ingenuity. Heracles' labors made him a symbol of human endurance, the struggle against fate, and the possibility of redemption even after terrible sin. His death, caused by betrayal and a poisoned robe, was agonizing, but his spirit was granted immortality. He ascended to Olympus and married Hebe, the goddess of youth, a rare case of a mortal achieving full divinity. These mortal champions, Perseus, Theseus, Heracles, were not merely strong. They were flawed, driven, and often doomed by the very gods who empowered them. Their stories reflected the human condition, a life shaped by forces beyond control, where greatness came with suffering, and even triumph carried the seeds of tragedy. As myths spread and evolved, different regions of Greece emphasized different heroes and gods, creating a rich tapestry of local traditions. In Thebes, the tragic lineage of Oedipus unfolded, a story of fate, prophecy, and blindness, both literal and metaphorical. In Argos, the family of Atreus gave rise to tales of betrayal, murder, and revenge that echoed through generations, culminating in the fall of Agamemnon and the vengeance of Orestes. In Athens, the cult of Athena dominated civic identity, blending myth with political pride. These localized myths were not isolated, they intertwined with one another, forming a network of stories that explained everything from natural phenomena to moral dilemmas. Greek mythology was not a closed canon but a living tradition, reshaped with each retelling, performance, and festival. Even the gods themselves were subject to change. In the early myths, Zeus was a thunder-wielding tyrant, prone to wrath and destruction. But over time, he evolved into a more balanced, if still domineering, figure, the protector of order and justice. Similarly, Hades, initially feared as a grim and merciless ruler, came to be seen as fair, if stern, in his administration of the dead. The myths reflected the society that told them, its fears, its hopes, its attempts to understand a world that was often brutal and unpredictable. And as the Olympians continued their rule, new tales would arise, filled with passion, war, love, and loss, further binding the divine to the human in a mythic legacy that would endure for millennia. Even as the Olympians sat enthroned in the heavens, their dominion remained entangled in the affairs of mortals, and nowhere was this entanglement more apparent than in the brutal, glorious theatre of war. Among the most enduring and influential of all Greek myths was the tale of the Trojan War, a sprawling epic of divine manipulation, human pride, heroism, and tragedy that would become the backbone of classical literature and culture. The war's origin did not lie in mortal politics but in the wounded pride of the gods. At the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph, all the gods were invited, save one. Eris, the goddess of discord, furious at her exclusion, threw a golden apple into the crowd, inscribed with the words "to the fairest." The apple was immediately contested by three powerful goddesses: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Unable to decide among themselves, they turned to Zeus, who wisely refused to choose and instead appointed a mortal shepherd to act as judge, Paris of Troy, a prince living in exile. Each goddess attempted to sway Paris with a bribe. Hera offered power and dominion over all of Asia. Athena promised victory in war and unmatched wisdom. Aphrodite, however, offered the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose Aphrodite, setting in motion the events that would lead to a decade-long war and the downfall of Troy. Helen was already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, and when Paris, aided by Aphrodite, seduced and abducted her, he violated not only the sanctity of marriage but the fragile alliances between Greek city-states. Menelaus called upon the oath sworn by all Helen's former suitors, an agreement that bound them to defend her marriage. Among those called were the most powerful kings and warriors of the age: Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and Menelaus's brother; Achilles, son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus; Odysseus, king of Ithaca; Ajax the Great, Nestor, and many others. Thus assembled, the Greek forces launched 1,000 ships and sailed across the Aegean to lay siege to the city of Troy. But the war did not unfold simply as a contest of arms. The gods, too, took sides, treating the battlefield as a chessboard for their rivalries. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon supported the Greeks, bitter over Paris's judgment. Aphrodite, along with Mars and Apollo, favored the Trojans. Zeus, ever the arbitrator, tried to remain neutral but could not always resist intervening. Divine intervention was constant. Heroes were shielded by gods, guided by visions, or doomed by fate whispered into the ears of seers. The greatest of the Greek warriors was Achilles, unmatched in combat, invulnerable except for his heel, and driven not by patriotism but by personal glory. Yet even he was flawed. When Agamemnon dishonored him by seizing his war prize, Perseus, Achilles withdrew from battle, allowing the Trojans to gain ground. His absence changed the course of the war, demonstrating how one man's pride could endanger an entire campaign. During this period, the Trojans' greatest champion, Hector, brother of Paris and prince of Troy, emerged as a heroic figure, noble, dutiful, and tragically doomed. Hector was a stark contrast to the impulsive Paris and even to Achilles. He fought to protect his city and his family, not for glory. Eventually, the war reached a turning point. Achilles, enraged by the death of his close companion Patroclus, killed by Hector while wearing Achilles' armor, returned to the battlefield in a fury that bordered on divine. In a brutal duel, Achilles slew Hector and then, in defiance of all codes of honor, desecrated his body, dragging it behind his chariot. It was only through the quiet dignity of Hector's father, King Priam, who came to Achilles in the night to beg for his son's body, that Achilles' humanity was restored, and Hector was granted a proper burial. The war raged on, and the gods continued to meddle. Achilles met his end not in battle but through deception. Paris, guided by Apollo, shot an arrow that struck his only vulnerable spot, his heel. With Achilles gone, the Greeks turned to cunning rather than strength. Odysseus, known for his intelligence and guile, devised a plan to end the siege: the Trojan horse. A massive wooden horse was constructed, hollowed out to hide Greek soldiers. The rest of the Greek forces pretended to retreat, leaving the horse as an offering to the gods. The Trojans, believing the war was over, brought the horse into the city. That night, while the city slept, the hidden Greeks emerged, opened the gates, and signaled their army to return. Troy was sacked, its people slaughtered or enslaved, and its great walls reduced to rubble. The war had ended, but its consequences echoed for generations. The return journeys of the Greek heroes were fraught with peril. Odysseus wandered for 10 years before reaching Ithaca, encountering witches, cyclopes, sirens, and vengeful gods. Agamemnon returned home only to be murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra, setting off a cycle of vengeance that would dominate Greek tragedy. Even Helen, whose beauty had sparked the war, returned to Sparta with Menelaus, her story shifting from one of guilt to one of redemption. The Trojan War was not merely a story of conquest. It was a meditation on fate, honor, pride, and the costs of war. The gods played their games, but it was mortals who paid the price. The war revealed the dual nature of heroism, glory and destruction intertwined, and showcased how the divine and human worlds could never be fully separated. These stories, immortalized in Homer's Iliad and later in the Odyssey and other epics, became central to Greek identity. They were recited by bards, carved into temple walls, and etched into the very language of Greek art and philosophy. They were not static tales but living myths, retold and reinterpreted through generations, each time revealing new dimensions of the human condition. As Greece transitioned from myth into recorded history, the legacy of the Trojan War and its heroes would continue to shape its politics, its values, and its vision of the past. And even as new gods and empires rose, the old stories endured, whispering of a time when gods walked among men and heroes battled not only monsters and armies but fate itself. While the gods of Olympus reigned and the Trojan War etched its blood-soaked legends into eternity, another realm of Greek mythology was shaping the deeper, more mysterious contours of the cosmos, a place older than Olympus, darker than war, and more eternal than the lives of any hero, the underworld. Known as Hades, after its grim and solitary ruler, the Greek underworld was not simply a place of punishment or torment, but a complex and stratified domain where the souls of the dead journeyed, judged not by moral binaries, but by fate, remembrance, and the weight of their lives. The Greeks envisioned the soul, or psyche, leaving the body at death and traveling to the underworld through a series of stages that reflected the rituals of burial and the spiritual geography of myth. The first step was crossing the river Styx, the boundary between the world of the living and the dead. To do this, the soul needed to be properly buried, with a coin, an obol, placed under the tongue to pay the ferryman Charon. Those without a proper burial were doomed to wander the banks of the Styx for 100 years, voiceless and forgotten. Once aboard Charon's creaking, shadow-draped ferry, the soul was taken across the black waters, beneath the watchful gaze of Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed dog who guarded the gates. Cerberus allowed entry, but never exit. The underworld itself was divided into distinct realms, each suited to the life or deeds of the soul it received. The majority of souls entered the Asphodel Meadows, a grey and misty plain where those who lived average, unremarkable lives dwelled in a dreamlike existence, neither punished nor rewarded. It was a realm of shadows, where identity faded and memories dulled, an eternity of silence and sameness. For those who had committed grave sins or defied the gods, there was Tartarus, a deep, hellish abyss beneath even Hades, where eternal punishments were meted out. It was here that the worst offenders in myth were imprisoned. Sisyphus, a king who cheated death twice and scorned the gods, was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill, only for it to fall back down for eternity. Tantalus, who stole ambrosia and revealed divine secrets to mortals, was made to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree, forever thirsty and hungry, with water and food always just out of reach. Ixion, who lusted after Hera and murdered his kin, was bound to a flaming wheel that spun without end. These punishments were not just retribution, but symbolic reflections of their sins: desire without fulfillment, ambition without end, deceit without escape. Conversely, for the righteous few who had achieved greatness, virtue, or heroic death, there was Elysium, also called the Elysian Fields, a paradise of eternal spring, music, beauty, and joy. Here the favored of the gods walked in peace, often reincarnated by choice, and in rare cases, granted the Isles of the Blessed after 3 virtuous lifetimes. It was a place of reward, but only for the exceptional. Between these realms flowed other rivers, each embodying a different aspect of death: the Acron, river of woe; the Cocytus, river of lamentation; the Phlegethon, river of fire; and the Lethe, river of forgetfulness. Souls destined for rebirth drank from the Lethe, erasing all memory of their past lives before returning to the world of the living. In rare cases, philosophers and mystics spoke of another river, Mnemosyne, the river of memory, whose waters could allow a soul to retain its wisdom through reincarnation. At the heart of the underworld stood the palace of Hades and Persephone. Hades, unlike the Christian devil he was later confused with, was not evil. He was stern, just, and unmoved by mortal pleas. He ruled his realm with unyielding law, ensuring the dead remained where they belonged. Persephone, however, embodied the seasonal cycle and the duality of existence. Her myth, one of abduction and eventual compromise, defined the rhythm of life and death. When Hades first seized her from the fields of Nysa, the earth mourned. Her mother, Demeter, goddess of agriculture, withdrew her blessings, and the world turned cold and barren. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld and part above. Her ascent marked spring, her descent autumn, symbolizing growth and decay. Their union, while born of violence, became one of the most significant in myth. Persephone transformed from innocent maiden to queen of the dead, regal and commanding. She was worshipped not only as a goddess of death, but also of transformation and rebirth. The underworld was not just a place, it was a reflection of the Greek worldview, a place where all actions had consequences, where memory and identity mattered, where death was not an end, but a new stage in a larger, mysterious cycle. It underscored the moral framework of Greek life, not as a binary between good and evil, but a spectrum of choices, each carrying its own eternal weight. The mysteries of the underworld gave rise to some of Greece's most esoteric and sacred rites. Chief among them were the Eleusinian mysteries, secret religious ceremonies held in honor of Demeter and Persephone. These rites, open only to initiates, promised hope for a blessed afterlife, perhaps even a path to Elysium. What occurred during the ceremonies was never written down, but the promise of transformation and a more merciful death bound generations of Greeks in reverent secrecy. Poets, too, explored the underworld with awe and terror. Homer described Odysseus's journey to the land of the dead, where the hero, seeking wisdom, met the spirits of his mother, fallen comrades, and the prophet Tiresias. In his descent, Odysseus saw that even the greatest warriors were mere shades in the afterlife, stripped of strength, their names echoing louder than their spirits. The message was clear: fame could endure, but the soul was a fragile echo in the darkness. Later poets like Virgil and philosophers like Plato would take these themes and expand upon them, weaving the underworld deeper into the moral and metaphysical fabric of Western thought. The underworld was not only a setting but a lens through which to understand justice, memory, and the ultimate fate of all things. Greek mythology did not offer easy comfort about death, it demanded contemplation, reverence, and acceptance. The gods of Olympus may have ruled from the heights, but it was in the shadows of Hades that the soul's true journey began. Beyond the dark corridors of the underworld and the fiery splendor of Olympus, there existed a realm of myth populated not by gods or heroes, but by creatures, beings born from chaos, nature, punishment, or divine experimentation. These mythological monsters and hybrids served as both tests and symbols, embodying the fears, taboos, and moral boundaries of ancient Greek culture. They were obstacles in heroic journeys, omens of divine wrath, or remnants of older, primal forces that predated even the Olympians. Among the earliest of these were the children of Echidna and Typhon, considered the monstrous progenitors of many of the horrors that haunted the mythological landscape. Echidna, half woman and half serpent, dwelled in a cave and birthed a lineage that would plague mortals and heroes alike. Her offspring included Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of Hades, the Hydra of Lerna, a serpent with regenerative heads whose breath was poison and blood acidic, the Chimera, a fire-breathing beast with the body of a lion, the head of a goat rising from its back, and a serpent for a tail, and the Nemean lion, whose golden fur was impervious to weapons. These creatures were not merely animals with terrifying traits, they symbolized chaos and the disruption of natural order. Their defeat often represented a restoration of cosmic balance, a hero's triumph not just over danger but over entropy and moral decay. Heracles, in particular, encountered many of these beasts during his 12 labors. The first labor required him to slay the Nemean lion. Unable to pierce its hide with weapons, Heracles ultimately strangled the beast and skinned it with its own claws, wearing the pelt as armor. His second labor was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, a 9-headed serpent whose heads regrew twofold when cut. Heracles succeeded only by cauterizing each stump with a torch, a task aided by his nephew Iolaus. These stories weren't just thrilling battles, they were lessons in perseverance, cleverness, and the need for cooperation. Other creatures dwelled on the fringes of the known world, guarding treasures, punishing arrogance, or testing virtue. The Sphinx, with the body of a lion, wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman, terrorized Thebes by posing a riddle to all who passed. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Those who answered incorrectly were devoured. Only Oedipus solved it, replying man, whose life progresses from crawling as an infant to walking upright to leaning on a cane in old age. Upon hearing the correct answer, the Sphinx destroyed herself. This myth wove together intellect, fate, and the tragic irony that would later engulf Oedipus's life. The Gorgons, 3 sisters with snakes for hair and gazes that turned men to stone, were another embodiment of dread and divine punishment. Only Medusa was mortal, and her story is among the most complex. Once a beautiful maiden, she was transformed into a monster by Athena after being violated by Poseidon in the goddess's temple. Her transformation, while often depicted as a curse, can also be read as a form of protection or retribution. Medusa was ultimately slain by Perseus, who used a mirrored shield to avoid her deadly gaze. From her severed neck sprang Pegasus and Chryse, born of divine blood and sky. Other creatures blended human and animal in ways that blurred lines of identity and morality. The centaurs, half man, half horse, represented the conflict between civilization and barbarism. While most were unruly and drunken, Chiron stood apart, wise and just, serving as tutor to many heroes, including Achilles and Asclepius. His death, caused by a poisoned arrow, marked a turning point in myth, as he traded his immortality for the release of Prometheus, an act of ultimate self-sacrifice. The Minotaur, half man and half bull, was a creature of shame and secrecy, imprisoned in the labyrinth beneath Crete. Born from the union of Pasiphae and a divine bull, it embodied the unnatural result of pride and sacrilege. King Minos commissioned Daedalus to build the labyrinth to contain the beast, and each year, 7 Athenian boys and 7 girls were sent as tribute to be devoured. Theseus, with the help of Ariadne's thread, navigated the maze and slew the Minotaur, ending the cycle of blood. Yet even this victory carried echoes of abandonment and betrayal, as Theseus later deserted Ariadne on Naxos, fulfilling the pattern of heroism entangled with personal failure. Sea monsters also haunted the Greek imagination, reminders of nature's unpredictability and the dangers of hubris. Scylla and Charybdis, 2 perils of the sea, loomed large in the Odyssey. Scylla, once a beautiful nymph, was transformed into a creature with multiple heads that snatched sailors from their ships. Charybdis, on the opposite side of a narrow strait, created whirlpools that could consume entire vessels. Odysseus had to choose between them, sacrificing a few men to Scylla to avoid total annihilation, an allegory of leadership, loss, and difficult decisions. Another sea terror, Cetus, was sent to punish Queen Cassiopeia for boasting that her daughter Andromeda was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs favored by Poseidon. Andromeda was chained to a rock as sacrifice, only to be saved by Perseus, who used Medusa's head to turn the beast to stone. These myths often punished vanity, hubris, or moral transgression, warning that beauty or status could not shield one from divine wrath. Not all mythical beings were monstrous. Some were simply strange, their stories curious and allegorical. The sirens, for example, were not fearsome in appearance but irresistible in song. Their melodies lured sailors to their deaths on rocky shores. Odysseus, eager to hear their song without succumbing, had his men plug their ears with wax and bind him to the mast. This act of restraint and foresight contrasted sharply with the recklessness of other seafarers and demonstrated the power and danger of temptation. The Harpies, winged spirits with the faces of women, were often agents of punishment, stealing food or defiling sacred spaces. They embodied pollution and divine vengeance, but also became symbols of lingering guilt or unresolved wrongs. Satyrs and nymphs, less malevolent but still powerful, populated the forests, rivers, and glades of myth. Satyrs, followers of Dionysus, were lustful and chaotic, blending revelry with danger. Nymphs, though often benevolent, could also be vengeful, especially when disrespected. Narcissus, who spurned the love of the nymph Echo, was cursed to fall in love with his own reflection, wasting away in self-obsession. His story became an eternal warning against vanity and emotional cruelty. These creatures and beings formed the mythological backdrop against which heroes proved themselves, gods demonstrated their will, and mortals learned the consequences of arrogance or kindness. They were not merely obstacles or villains, they were embodiments of the world's mysteries, each with a story that reflected some aspect of nature, morality, or the human psyche. Through them, the Greeks explored the limits of their understanding, the dangers of the unknown, and the boundaries between the mortal and divine. As Greek mythology expanded through centuries of storytelling, it not only created a sprawling pantheon of gods and heroes but also shaped the very culture, rituals, and philosophical inquiries of ancient Greece. At its core, mythology was not merely entertainment or religious explanation, it was a foundational structure upon which societal norms, political authority, and personal identity were built. The gods were not distant deities, they were present in daily life, honored at altars, invoked before journeys, petitioned in prayers, and appeased through sacrifice. Every city-state had its own patron deity, its own founding myths, and its own interpretation of the major Olympians. Athens, perhaps the most influential polis in terms of mythological preservation, revered Athena above all. The myth of her contest with Poseidon for dominion over the city exemplified how myths were localized to explain civic identity and political allegiance. According to the story, both Athena and Poseidon desired to become the patron god of a newly founded city. To settle the matter, they were each asked to present a gift. Poseidon struck the ground and produced either a saltwater spring or a horse, depending on the version. Athena, however, planted the first olive tree. The citizens, recognizing the olive's value, offering food, oil, and wood, chose Athena, and the city became Athens. This myth not only elevated the goddess's status but reinforced the city's values: wisdom, strategy, and agricultural prosperity over brute strength and unpredictability. These mythic narratives were inseparable from ritual practice. Temples were constructed not simply as places of worship but as homes for the gods on earth. The Parthenon in Athens stood as both a religious center and a political statement, its friezes and sculptures depicting mythological scenes that echoed Athenian ideals. Festivals, too, were saturated with myth. The Panathenaea honored Athena with processions, sacrifices, and competitions. The Eleusinian Mysteries, secret rites dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, offered initiates a deeper understanding of life, death, and the possibility of spiritual renewal. Participants were sworn to secrecy, but the promise of a better fate in the afterlife made the mysteries central to the religious life of many Greeks. In Sparta, myth and state were fused even more aggressively. The Spartans traced their lineage to Heracles, claiming descent from the Heraclidae, the sons of the hero who had been granted divine status. This connection justified their militarism, their austerity, and their belief in the supremacy of strength and endurance. Their reverence for Apollo as a god of order, light, and purification shaped their social discipline. Mythology, in this context, was not passive. It was weaponized to legitimize laws, wars, and hierarchies. Even the Olympic Games, which united Greeks from across the Hellenic world, were infused with mythic origins. The Games were said to have been founded by Heracles himself after completing his labors. Held in honor of Zeus at Olympia, they were as much a religious festival as a sporting event. Victors were not only celebrated as athletes but honored as living embodiments of divine favor. In education, mythology played a central role. Boys were taught the Homeric epics not just as literature but as moral instruction. Heroes like Odysseus and Achilles were examined for their virtues and flaws, their choices debated as though they were real historical figures. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, while often critical of the literal truth of myths, still engaged with them deeply, using them as allegories for larger truths. Plato, for instance, condemned the immoral behaviors of the gods depicted by Homer, yet in his dialogues, he frequently employed mythic motifs to explore the nature of the soul, the structure of the cosmos, and the meaning of justice. The myth of which concludes the Republic, presents a vision of the afterlife that, while influenced by traditional mythology, serves a moral and philosophical purpose. Aristotle took a more empirical approach but acknowledged the educational power of myth, especially in poetry and drama, as a means of cultivating virtue. Greek tragedy, perhaps the most refined artistic expression of myth, brought these stories to the stage, transforming sacred tales into public reflection. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides reinterpreted myths for civic audiences, using familiar figures to explore issues of fate, justice, free will, and the consequences of hubris. Aeschylus's Orestia examined the cycle of vengeance and the establishment of lawful justice through the myth of the House of Atreus. Sophocles' Oedipus Rex delved into the tragic consequences of prophecy and self-ignorance. Euripides' Medea portrayed the fury of a wronged woman who defies divine and social order. These plays were not mere retellings, they were reimaginings that spoke to the anxieties and aspirations of the city-state. The chorus, often representing the voice of the people, provided commentary, lamentation, and moral context. Audiences, familiar with the myths, were invited to reflect not only on the events but on their meanings. Tragedy thus served as a bridge between the sacred and the civic, a ritual of collective understanding and catharsis. Comedy, too, engaged with mythology, though with irreverence. Aristophanes parodied the gods, exposing their follies and mocking the contradictions in mythic logic. In doing so, He reminded audiences that while myths were foundational, they were also malleable, open to critique and reinterpretation. Mythology's role in Greek identity was so profound that even during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, as traditional religious practices began to shift, the stories endured. They were absorbed into new cultural frameworks, their meanings expanded, their characters adapted. Alexander the Great claimed descent from Achilles and Heracles, using myth to legitimize conquest. Roman poets like Virgil and Ovid reworked Greek myths for their own ends, preserving them even as they transformed them. But in their original Greek context, myths were never just stories. They were a language of power, a mirror of human nature, and a map of the sacred. They taught lessons, justified laws, comforted the grieving, and warned the arrogant. They offered explanations for the inexplicable and gave structure to the chaos of existence. To be Greek was to know the myths, to live among their symbols, to walk through landscapes where gods had once trod and heroes had fought. Whether in the echoing halls of a temple, the hush of a theatre, the clamor of a battlefield, or the quiet murmur of a household prayer, the myths were always present, ancient, evolving, and eternal. Among the most captivating elements of Greek mythology is its deep entanglement with fate, an omnipresent force that transcended even the gods themselves. From the moment a child was born, their destiny was already written by the Moirai, or fates, three primordial deities who spun, measured, and cut the thread of life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured it, and Atropos cut it, signaling the moment of death. Their authority was absolute. Not even Zeus, with all his thunderbolts and divine rule, could override their decree. This concept of fate shaped the worldview of the ancient Greeks, that human life was both heroic and tragic because it unfolded within boundaries that could never fully be escaped. The stories of Greek mythology are filled with characters who struggle against fate, only to fulfill it in the very act of defiance. Perhaps no myth illustrates this tension better than that of Oedipus, the doomed king of Thebes. Before his birth, it was foretold that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, his parents, Laius and Jocasta, attempted to thwart the prophecy by abandoning him as an infant. But fate is rarely so easily avoided. Rescued and raised by another royal family, Oedipus grew up unaware of his true origins. Upon hearing the same prophecy himself, he fled what he believed were his real parents to avoid committing such atrocities. But in doing so, he wandered straight into his destiny. He killed Laius at a crossroads, solved the riddle of the Sphinx, and married Jocasta, becoming king. Only later, after years of rule, did the truth unravel, and with it, Oedipus's sanity and kingdom. The myth is not just a tale of horror, it is a meditation on the limits of knowledge, the blindness of pride, and the inescapability of fate. Tragedy in Greek mythology is often born from this intersection of fate and personal choice. The Greeks did not view their gods as omnibenevolent figures, but rather as powerful entities who occasionally offered guidance or wrath. Humans, meanwhile, were given the capacity for reason and decision, but never the power to alter their ultimate destiny. This fundamental tension was the heartbeat of Greek drama and mythology. Another powerful example is the myth of Achilles. From his earliest days, his mother Thetis knew he was fated to die young if he went to war. She dipped him in the river Estyx to make him invulnerable, holding him by the heel. Later, when the Trojan War broke out, Achilles chose to fight, fully aware that his glory would come at the cost of his life. His story raises the question, is it better to live a long, quiet life, or a short one filled with eternal fame? Achilles chose the latter, and his name lived on, but only because his fate was sealed. Fate was also often tied to prophecy, a divine glimpse into the inevitable. The Oracle of Delphi, sacred to Apollo, served as the voice of such insight. Kings, generals, and ordinary citizens would travel miles to receive cryptic pronouncements from the Pythia, the high priestess. These oracles rarely gave clear instructions. Instead, they spoke in riddles, often misunderstood or ignored until the consequences became inescapable. One famous example is the prophecy given to Croesus, king of Lydia, who was told that if he crossed the Halys River, he would destroy a great empire. Taking it as a sign of victory, he attacked Persia, only to find that the empire destroyed was his own. The ambiguity of fate was a central theme. Mortals could act, but their actions often led to the very outcomes they sought to avoid. In some myths, fate took on a more metaphysical quality. The tale of Prometheus, who foresaw the downfall of Zeus through a future child, kept that knowledge secret. Though he was punished for giving fire to humanity, his resistance and wisdom made him a symbol of defiance and endurance. Zeus, for all his might, could not extract the prophecy from Prometheus, indicating that even divine rulers were bound by the unseen chains of future consequence. Yet while fate was inescapable, it was not always cruel. Sometimes, it offered moments of clarity, justice, or poetic closure. The myth of Persephone, for instance, is wrapped in cycles of time and inevitability. Abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld, she becomes queen of the dead. Her mother, Demeter, goddess of agriculture, mourns her absence, causing the world to wither. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld and part on Earth. This myth explains the changing seasons, but it also reflects the deeper theme of cyclical fate, of life, death, and rebirth. Fate in Greek mythology wasn't necessarily fatalistic. Though outcomes were fixed, the manner in which characters met their fate mattered deeply. Honor, bravery, love, sacrifice, all of these qualities shaped how stories were remembered. The Greeks valued kleos, or glory, what one left behind in name and deed. Heroes were not judged merely by survival but by the nature of their choices in the face of inevitable ends. The concept of hamartia, or tragic flaw, also emerged from this worldview. Great heroes often fell not just because of fate, but because of internal defects: pride, rage, jealousy. Agamemnon's arrogance, Ajax's fury, Jason's betrayal, all contributed to their undoing. These flaws humanized the myths, making them not only cosmic tales but mirrors of the human soul. In many stories, characters are warned by dreams, omens, or seers. Cassandra, cursed by Apollo to utter true prophecies that no one would believe, foresaw the fall of Troy. Her tragedy was not just her knowledge, but her inability to alter events or convince others. In a world governed by fate, insight often came with helplessness. The Greeks accepted this tension between freedom and predetermination as part of life's mystery. They saw themselves as agents within a larger order, capable of great deeds, but always within the invisible bounds drawn by the Moirai. Even the gods had to respect those bounds. This sense of cosmic order, sometimes called Ananke, emphasized necessity. In Hesiod's theogony, even chaos and Gaia are subject to an inescapable unfolding. The Greeks did not resent fate. They honored it, feared it, and shaped their stories around its power. And in doing so, they created a mythological tapestry that reflected the beauty, terror, and dignity of existing in a world where so much is beyond control. For ancient audiences, these myths weren't just stories, they were philosophies wrapped in narrative, teaching not how to escape fate, but how to face it with courage. While the major Olympians dominate much of Greek mythology's landscape, an entire realm of deities and beings existed in the shadows of Mount Olympus, ancient, chthonic, and often older than the gods themselves. These primordial and underworld forces represented the raw, elemental aspects of the cosmos and humanity's most fundamental fears and mysteries: night, death, sleep, dreams, vengeance, chaos. Unlike the shining gods of Olympus, these figures were often tied to the earth, the underworld, or the pre-cosmic void. Understanding them reveals the darker and more mysterious side of the Greek mythological imagination. At the beginning of everything stood chaos, the first principle. Not a god in the traditional sense, chaos was the yawning void, the gap between heaven and earth. From chaos came Gaia, the earth, and Tartarus, the abyss beneath the underworld. These forces were not born of divine will but simply emerged, eternal and self-creating. Gaia, or Mother Earth, gave birth to Uranus, the sky, and with him, she conceived the Titans, 12 powerful deities that included Cronus, Rhea, Oceanus, and Hyperion. These Titans represented a more primal and untamed power than their Olympian descendants. They ruled the cosmos during the Golden Age, until Cronus, in fear of being overthrown by his children, began swallowing them at birth. This act of control, paranoia, and eventual defeat by his son Zeus set the tone for many mythological cycles: the inevitable rise and fall of power, the rebellion of the young against the old, and the passing of eras. But beneath the drama of Titanomachy, the war between Titans and Olympians, lurked even deeper forces. Tartarus, the pit of eternal torment, was not merely a place but also a primordial entity. After the Titans were defeated, many were cast into Tartarus, along with monsters like Typhon, the serpentine giant born of Gaia and considered the deadliest creature in Greek myth. Typhon challenged Zeus himself and nearly won, tearing the sinews from the king of the gods. But ultimately, he too was defeated and imprisoned in the depths of Tartarus, beneath Mount Etna, where his rumblings were said to cause volcanic eruptions. One of the most intriguing aspects of Greek mythology is the personification of abstract concepts into deities or spirits, known as daemons. These were not always worshipped in temples but were understood to influence human experience. Thanatos, the personification of death, was depicted as a winged youth or a dark-robed figure, silent and inexorable. He was not evil, but inevitable. His twin brother, Hypnos, god of sleep, was gentler, associated with rest and dreams. Hypnos lived in a cave where night and silence reigned, and where the river Lethe flowed, its waters inducing forgetfulness. His children, the Oneiroi, were the spirits of dreams. Morpheus shaped dreams into human forms, Phobita into animals, and Phantasos into inanimate visions. These dreambringers were said to emerge each night through one of two gates, one of horn, which produced true dreams, and one of ivory, which sent false visions. Their presence in myth underscores the Greek fascination with the boundary between the conscious and unconscious, between illusion and truth. Perhaps the most terrifying chthonic beings were the Erinyes, or Furies. Born from the blood of Uranus when Cronus castrated him, they were ancient goddesses of vengeance, older than Zeus himself. These winged women with snakes for hair pursued those who shed kindred blood, especially murderers of family. They were relentless, their very presence a manifestation of guilt and retribution. In Aeschylus's Eumenides, the final play of the Oresteia trilogy, the Furies chase Orestes for killing his mother Clytemnestra, even though he did so to avenge his father. Their pursuit represents an older moral order, one based on blood and retribution, clashing with the emerging idea of civic justice, as Athena ultimately intervenes to establish trial by jury in Athens. The underworld itself, ruled by Hades and Persephone, was a rich tapestry of mythological geography. Unlike the Christian conception of hell, the Greek underworld was not necessarily a place of punishment. It was where all souls went after death, divided into various regions. The Asphodel meadows were for ordinary souls, who lived neither heroically nor wickedly. The Elysian fields were a paradise for the righteous and heroic. Tartarus, however, was reserved for the damned, those who committed the most heinous crimes or defied the gods. Here resided Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder uphill forever, only for it to fall each time he neared the summit. Tantalus stood in a pool of water beneath fruit-laden branches, always just out of reach, tormented by eternal hunger and thirst. Ixion, who attempted to seduce Hera, was bound to a fiery, spinning wheel for eternity. These punishments were not only grotesque but moral, each fit the crime, embodying Greek ideas of cosmic justice and the price of hubris. River spirits and ferrymen played critical roles in the journey of the soul. Charon, the grim boatman, ferried the dead across the river Styx, provided they could pay him with a coin placed in their mouth at burial. The Styx itself, one of 5 rivers in the underworld, was sacred even to the gods. An oath sworn on its waters could not be broken, and if a god violated that oath, they would be exiled from Olympus for 9 years. Other rivers included Acron, river of pain, Cocytus, river of wailing, Phlegethon, river of fire, and Lethe, river of forgetfulness. These rivers symbolized not only the trials of the soul but also the varied aspects of death and the afterlife. Chthonic deities like Hecate blurred the lines between upper and lower worlds. A goddess of magic, crossroads, and ghosts, Hecate was often depicted holding torches, guiding souls through the darkness. She was invoked in rites of protection and necromancy, often associated with witches and moonlight. Though she later became demonized in later traditions, in classical Greece she was a powerful, liminal figure, straddling realms and identities. Then there were the Keres, spirits of violent death, who haunted battlefields and fed on the dying. Unlike Thanatos, who brought peaceful death, the Keres reveled in carnage. They were the dread opposite of the Muses, whose gifts of art and inspiration lifted the human soul. These darker spirits were reminders of mortality's most brutal face, one that the Greeks acknowledged with grim realism. Even dreams and madness had divine patrons. The god Pan, half goat and half man, was said to instill sudden fear, panic, in travelers who heard his eerie cry in remote forests. Mania, a spirit of insanity, embodied the loss of reason and control. The Greeks understood that the mind was as vulnerable as the body, and their myths reflected this with vivid clarity. The chthonic realm was not just a hellscape of torment, it was a deeply symbolic structure that made sense of death, justice, memory, and the unseen. It served as a mirror for human actions, a warning against pride, and a map for the journey beyond life. In venerating these older, darker powers, the Greeks acknowledged that not all wisdom comes from light. Some truths, perhaps the deepest ones, lurk in shadow, in silence, in the space beneath the earth, where forgotten gods still whisper through the cracks of myth. Greek mythology is filled with countless tales of mortal heroes whose lives were shaped by divine intervention, tragic flaws, and quests for glory. Among the most renowned heroes is Heracles, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. From birth, Heracles was marked by both immense strength and the burden of destiny. Hera, Zeus's jealous wife, hated him and tried to kill him by sending 2 serpents to his cradle, but the infant Heracles strangled them with ease. His life became a series of feats that tested his strength, courage, and endurance. The 12 labors of Heracles stand as some of the most iconic myths. Each labor was a seemingly impossible task imposed upon him as penance for the madness sent by Hera, which caused him to kill his own wife and children. His tasks ranged from slaying the Nemean lion, whose golden hide was impervious to weapons, to capturing the Erymanthian boar alive, cleaning the Augean stables in a single day, and obtaining the golden apples of the Hesperides guarded by a dragon. These labors were more than mere physical challenges. They symbolized the struggle against chaos and the quest to bring order to the world. Heracles' story does not end with the labors. He married several times, faced betrayal and tragedy, and ultimately died a mortal death, but was granted apotheosis, immortality among the gods, upon his death. His journey from mortal to god embodied the Greek ideal of achieving glory through suffering and perseverance. Another legendary hero is Perseus, famed for slaying the Gorgon Medusa. Medusa was a terrifying creature with snakes for hair, whose gaze turned men to stone. Perseus, aided by gifts from the gods, a reflective bronze shield from Athena, winged sandals from Hermes, and a magical sword, used his wit and divine assistance to behead Medusa without looking directly at her. From Medusa's blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse. Perseus's adventures did not stop there. He rescued Andromeda from a sea monster sent by Poseidon to punish her mother's hubris. Perseus's tale is one of bravery, cunning, and the favor of the gods, illustrating how mortal heroes often relied on divine tools and intervention to succeed. Jason and the Argonauts represent a different kind of heroism, one of leadership, adventure, and quest for a magical object. Jason's goal was to retrieve the Golden Fleece, a symbol of kingship and authority, from the distant land of Colchis. Gathering a crew of the greatest heroes of the age, including Heracles, Orpheus, and Atalanta, Jason's journey was fraught with dangers: harpies, clashing rocks, hostile kings, and magical challenges set by the sorceress Medea, who would become his lover and tragic partner. Medea, a priestess of Hecate, used her sorcery to help Jason succeed but later suffered betrayal and enacted devastating revenge, highlighting themes of love, loyalty, and tragic consequences. Jason's story reflects the tension between human ambition, divine will, and the fragility of trust. The Trojan War is perhaps the grandest stage for Greek heroism, weaving together mortal valor, divine machinations, and the tragic cost of pride. Achilles, the mightiest Greek warrior, was central to this conflict. Born of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus, Achilles was dipped in the river Styx to become nearly invulnerable except for his heel, which remained mortal. His rage and grief shaped much of the Iliad, as he withdrew from battle over an insult to his honor, only returning to avenge the death of his close friend Patroclus. Hector, Prince of Troy, was his worthy opponent, noble, courageous, and devoted to his family and city. Their duel near the walls of Troy is among the most famous scenes in Western literature. The heroes of the Trojan War were not flawless. Their passions and decisions brought destruction as much as glory. Odysseus, known for his cunning and eloquence, was another hero whose journey extended beyond the battlefield. His decade-long voyage home, recounted in the Odyssey, involved encounters with monsters like the Cyclops Polyphemus, the enchantress Circe, and the sirens whose songs lured sailors to doom. Odysseus's intelligence and resourcefulness contrasted with brute strength, emphasizing a different kind of heroism based on wit and endurance. These myths of heroes reveal Greek values: courage, honor, cleverness, and the pursuit of kleos, or everlasting fame. Yet, they also portray the tragic human condition, mortality, suffering, and the complex interplay of fate and free will. Through their stories, the Greeks explored the potential and limits of humanity, the consequences of pride, and the possibility of redemption or ruin. Heroes were bridges between gods and men, their exploits illuminating the divine influence on mortal lives and the enduring quest for meaning in a chaotic world. Greek mythology is deeply entwined with the concept of the afterlife, not merely as a final destination but as a reflection of the soul's journey, justice, and transformation. Unlike many modern ideas of heaven and hell, the Greek underworld was complex, multifaceted, and often ambiguous. At its center was Hades, both the name of the god who ruled the realm and the realm itself. The underworld was believed to lie beneath the earth, a shadowy domain where all souls, regardless of their deeds, descended after death. Yet the experiences there varied widely depending on a person's life, choices, and divine favor. The journey to the underworld was perilous and ritualized. Upon death, the soul, or psyche, was escorted by Hermes Psychopompos, the guide of souls, to the river Styx or Akron. To cross these waters, the soul needed passage provided by Charon, the grim ferryman, who demanded an obol, a coin placed in the mouth of the deceased as payment. Without it, the soul was doomed to wander the riverbanks, restless and forgotten. The underworld was divided into several distinct regions. The asphodel meadows were a dull and grey place for the ordinary dead, those who lived neither particularly virtuous nor wicked lives. Here, souls existed in a ghost-like, neutral state, a pale shadow of their former selves. Elysium, or the Elysian Fields, was reserved for the blessed, heroes, and those favored by the gods. This was a paradise of eternal spring, sunlight, and joy, a reward for exceptional virtue or heroic deeds. Souls in Elysium could live in peace and were sometimes granted reincarnation in new, favorable lives. Contrasting sharply with these was Tartarus, a deep abyss of torment and imprisonment. Reserved for the worst offenders against the gods and cosmic order, Tartarus housed eternal punishments tailored to the nature of their crimes. Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder uphill endlessly only for it to roll back down, symbolized futile labor. Tantalus, standing forever hungry and thirsty while food and water receded just beyond reach, embodied unending desire and frustration. These eternal punishments were moral lessons woven into the fabric of myth, emphasizing the consequences of hubris, betrayal, and impiety. The rulers of the underworld, Hades and Persephone, embodied its dual nature. Hades was stern and just but not cruel, governing the realm with order and impartiality. Persephone's seasonal descent and return from the underworld explained the cycle of growth and decay, symbolizing death and rebirth. Her abduction by Hades and Demeter's resulting grief transformed the landscape of the earth itself, creating the seasons. Mysteries and cults developed around these beliefs, promising initiates hope for a blessed afterlife. The Eleusinian mysteries, centered on Demeter and Persephone, were among the most significant. Though their details remained secret, these rites offered spiritual enlightenment and the promise of a better fate beyond death. Greek mythology also portrayed heroes who ventured into the underworld and returned, bridging the worlds of the living and the dead. Orpheus, famed for his enchanting music, journeyed to reclaim his wife Eurydice, pleading with Hades to release her. Though granted permission on the condition he not look back until they reached the surface, Orpheus failed, losing her forever. His tale is a poignant meditation on love, loss, and the limits of human will against fate. Heracles, in one of his 12 labors, descended to capture Cerberus, the three-headed dog guarding the underworld's gates. His success demonstrated human courage and divine favor but also highlighted the permeability of boundaries between life and death in myth. These journeys symbolize humanity's eternal struggle to understand and transcend mortality. Greek conceptions of the soul and afterlife were neither wholly bleak nor uniformly joyous. They reflected a nuanced vision where honor, memory, and the quality of one's life influenced one's fate after death. The underworld was a realm of justice, transformation, and continuity, reminding mortals of their place in the cosmic order and the enduring power of legacy.